Can I sleep beside you tonight?" The words were quiet, but they stopped Amos Keller cold. Ridgewater was a small Wyoming cattle town, and the winter of 1889 had settled in early. Amos lived a mile outside town in a one-room cabin that still felt like it belonged to his late wife, Eleanor. She had been gone 3 years, and the silence she left behind had become his daily companion. That night, sleet rattled the windows. Amos dozed by the stove when 3 hard knocks cut through the storm. He opened the door with a lantern and a revolver. For a heartbeat, he thought grief had started making him see things. The woman on his porch had Eleanor's eyes and Eleanor's hair, but the fear in her face was new. "Margaret?" he said. Eleanor's older sister nodded once, shivering so hard her teeth clicked. Her traveling coat was too thin. One glove was missing. A bruise darkened her wrist, like someone had tried to hold her in place. "You're freezing," Amos muttered, stepping aside. He got her inside, set water on the stove, and wrapped her in a spare blanket. When her hands steadied around a tin cup, he asked the question that had been stuck in his throat. "Who's chasing you?" "A man with money and a clean smile," she said. "And 3 bounty hunters who don't care what's true." Margaret reached into her coat and drew out a folded ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Names, dates, payments. The kind of neat handwriting that made ugly business look respectable. "I took this from Silas Crow," she said. "He runs rail contracts." "Crow's powerful." "Powerful enough to bury the truth. This book proves where his money goes." Amos had heard rumors of girls vanishing along the river towns. He had never expected proof to show up on his doorstep wearing his wife's face. "And now he put a price on you," Amos said. $500 for theft of private property." "That'll draw wolves." "They're already here. I saw one at the station asking about me. Another was drinking at the Silver Roan like he owned the floorboards." Amos set his cup down slowly. He used to wear a badge in Texas. He knew how fast a town's spine could bend when a rich man leaned on it. "You should go to the sheriff." "I watched the sheriff shake Crow's hand this morning." That ended that idea. The cabin fell into a silence broken only by the stove popping. Margaret stared into the fire as if she could burn the last 2 weeks out of her mind. "I didn't come to drag you into trouble," she said. "But Eleanor told me once, if I ever had to bet my life on one honest man, it would be you." Eleanor's name hit him like a familiar ache. "You can take the bed," Amos said. She shook her head. That bed was hers. He didn't argue. He understood grief's rules. The wind slammed the cabin once, hard enough to rattle the kettle. "It's silly," Margaret said, "but I haven't slept a full night since I left St. Louis. And if those men find me before dawn—" She stopped, breath trembling. Then she asked again, softer, like a woman forced to admit she was human. "Can I sleep beside you tonight? Just tonight, so I don't feel like I'm waiting to die alone." Amos stared at the fire, then nodded once. "Tonight," he said. "And in the morning, we make a plan that keeps you free." Morning came hard and pale. The storm had drifted east, but left the ranch wrapped in ice. Amos stepped outside before sunrise and read the yard like he used to read a street. Fresh tracks cut across the snow. 2 men, at least. One had lingered near the woodpile to smoke. Whoever they were, they had not bothered to hide that they were close. That meant they either felt sure of victory or wanted him nervous. Inside, Margaret laid the ledger on the table. "Caleb Crow posted a reward at first light. $500 for my return." He's got a judge's stamp to make it look clean." Amos flipped through a few pages. Fake freight, quiet payoffs, dates that lined up with men who had vanished from river camps. "This can bury him," he said, "if it reaches honest hands." Their plan was quick and risky. Get the book to Reverend Cole in Ridgewater. From there, it could ride with a women's aid shipment toward Fort Laramie before Crow could buy the road. Amos handed her a plain coat and a wide hat. "You ride behind me, head down." She almost smiled. "You give orders like a man who misses a badge." "I miss peace." They took the creek trail instead of the main road. A rider waited on the rise ahead, long duster, Winchester across his saddle. "Morning, Keller." Wade Mercer. Polite voice, empty eyes. "Morning," Amos said. Mercer's gaze slid to the second horse. "Didn't know you had company. A cousin passing through. That reward notice just hit town. You can make this easy. Hand her over. You get a cut and no blame. That money's not worth the dirt it's printed on." A younger rider appeared behind Mercer, restless and eager. Mercer tipped his chin. "Go tell Riker." The boy spurred off. Amos reached into his coat and pulled out his old star. Dull. Silver, but still a truth. "I'm not wearing this anymore, but I'm not helping a rich man erase his sins." Mercer studied the badge, then Amos's face. His hand hovered near his rifle, then fell away. "I don't care for Crow enough to die for his paper," he muttered. "But Riker will. He likes blood with his breakfast." "Then don't feed him." Mercer eased aside. Amos and Margaret rode past with time borrowed and paid for. By noon, Ridgewater was awake and uneasy. The saloon porch held too many strangers. The sheriff's deputy was suddenly friendly with men he had never met. Women carried sacks home quicker than usual and kept their eyes down. Even the blacksmith paused mid-hammer when Amos rode past, listening for trouble like it was a change in the wind. Amos avoided the main street and guided Margaret to the small white church behind the supply store. Reverend Cole opened the door, saw Margaret, and went still. "Good Lord," he breathed. "I didn't come to drag trouble to your steps," Margaret said softly. "You came to bring truth," the preacher answered. Amos pressed the ledger into his hands. "We need this out today." Cole nodded. "The aid crates leave before sundown. No one checks cloth. I'll hide this beneath the quilts." Margaret exhaled, but her shoulders stayed tight. "He'll come." "He's already coming," Amos said. "And if he thinks this town will sell you, he's about to learn some folks still remember what decency costs." The church bell rang the hour. Across the street, 3 riders turned into the square, and the man in the lead was already looking straight at the church door. The lead rider dismounted like he owned the ground. Tall, neat coat, a smile that never touched his eyes. Caleb Crow did not look like a man who needed bounty hunters to do his work, but pride like his always hired extra hands. 2 men flanked him, hard faces, hungry posture. The kind who thought a reward was the same thing as justice. Crow stopped at the foot of the church steps. "Margaret?" He said her name like it was a claim marker hammered into wood. "You frightened kind people with your little drama. Come with me, and I won't ruin this town's week." Inside the church, Reverend Cole held the ledger to his chest for half a heartbeat before sliding it into the crate he had prepared. Then he straightened his coat and opened the door. Amos stepped out first. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides. No sudden moves. No theater. "You're trespassing on church ground," the preacher said. Crow gave a short laugh. "I'm recovering my wife." Margaret moved into view beside Amos. Her face was pale but steady. The bruises along her throat had faded to yellow. The fear had not. "I'm not your wife in spirit. I was your possession on paper, and I'm done living like that." The onlookers had gathered by then. A few storekeepers, 2 ranch hands, 3 women with children on their hips. Everyone holding their breath like the whole town might crack if they exhaled too hard. Crow lifted a folded document. "Court order. Signed, sealed. She's unstable. She stole property and fled across state lines." Amos took 1 step down. "I've seen rich men buy ink before. That paper doesn't change what you are." One of Crow's men shifted, eager. "You don't get to talk like that without a badge." "I don't need a badge to know a coward when he's standing in boots." The man reached for his gun. The moment stretched thin as a wire. Amos did not draw. He just angled his body, putting himself between Margaret and the muzzle that was about to decide who mattered more. Then a voice cut across the square. "Put it away, Riker." Wade Mercer had ridden in quiet as snow. He dismounted beside the hitching rail. He was no saint, but he was the kind of hunter who knew the difference between a clean capture and a dirty one. Riker sneered. "You going soft?" "I'm going smart," Mercer said. "This isn't a runaway with a price. This is a man with witnesses and a preacher who'll swear to seeing bruises. You shoot here, and you'll be wanted in 3 counties by sundown." Crow's smile thinned. "I didn't come for a debate. I came for what's mine." Margaret's voice came out calm, which surprised even her. "You lost the right to call me yours the day you put your hands on my throat. I didn't steal from you. I collected proof of the crimes you buried under money." The crowd shifted. That word, proof, hit them harder than any gunshot. Amos glanced toward the supply wagons forming at the far end of town. The women's aid shipment was almost ready to roll. If the Ledger left Ridgewater, Crow would have to chase something he could not simply buy back. Crow saw the same movement. He read the town's posture with a predator's instinct. His eyes narrowed at the church door, at the preacher, at Amos. Then he made a choice that was all arrogance and no patience. "Fine," he said. "You want to play frontier hero, Keller. I'll take her with or without your permission." His hand went to his pistol. Amos moved faster than anyone expected. He did not shoot. He slammed Crow's wrist down hard against the rail. The pistol clattered to the boards. Riker lunged forward, and Mercer caught him by the collar and shoved him back. "Enough," Mercer growled. "You want her, Crow. You take this to a real marshal and a real judge." Crow yanked free, face flushed with rage and humiliation. The town had seen him fail. Men like him never forgot an audience. "This isn't over," he said softly. Amos held his gaze. "It ends when she says it ends." Crow mounted and rode out with his men, but not far. Amos could feel it in his bones. A man like that didn't retreat. He repositioned. And down the road, the aid wagons finally began to move. The Ledger was on its way. The question now was how much trouble Crow would can burn through to stop it. Crow did not ride far. He and his men camped east of Ridgewater, where the road could be watched without being seen. By evening, his anger had cooled into calculation. He knew the Ledger would leave town with the women's aid wagons at first light. He also knew that if Margaret reached Fort Laramie, his name would turn from rumor to warrant. So he chose a plan that relied on chaos instead of bullets. A small fire to pull men away, a quiet snatch in the dark, a fast ride before anyone could think. Amos did not sleep. He sat behind the parsonage with a low lantern and a saddled horse in the alley. Margaret was inside on a cot by the stove. She tried to look brave for the preacher's wife, but the old fear still lived in her shoulders. Near midnight, Reverend Cole came out with a tin cup of coffee. "You are not responsible for what he did to her," the preacher said. Amos kept his eyes on the street. "I'm responsible for what I do next." "Then do it clean," Cole replied. "No pride, just protection." The fire started just after the clock in the saloon struck 1. Only a flare behind the church shed with oil in the straw. Men rushed with buckets. Voices rose. The square filled with movement. Amos smelled the trick and still had to fight the instinct to run toward the smoke. He stayed where he was. That choice saved them. Riker slipped into the alley with another hunter. Margaret opened the back door a crack and a hand clamped over her mouth. Rope bit her wrists. No punches, no shouting. Amos hit Riker hard enough to drive him into the fence and tore the rope loose. The second man reached for his revolver and froze when a rifle cocked behind him. Wade Mercer stepped from the shadows. He looked like a man who had spent too many years letting bad people buy his silence. "Put it down," he said. "This is a church alley. You want to explain a dead woman to a judge." Crow appeared at the mouth of the lane with 2 men behind him. His smile was polite. His eyes were not. "You're choosing strangers over your town," he said to Mercer. Mercer shook his head once. "I'm choosing the town I want to live in next year." Crow's gaze slid to Amos and then to Margaret. "She's a prize with a price. You can't protect her forever." Amos answered quietly. "Long enough." The ranch hands arrived with Reverend Cole. The fire was already dying. Crow saw the witnesses stacking up. If he pushed now, he would lose the illusion that he was a respectable man passing through. He lifted his hands. "All right. You win this night." He backed away, voice soft as a threat. "Morning is a long road." When the alley emptied, Margaret leaned against the doorframe and drew a steadying breath. "I thought I was done running," she said. Amos shook his head. "You're not running. You're walking toward the truth." Mercer cleared his throat. "I'll ride with the wagons," he said, as if the words cost him something. "If Crow comes again, he'll have to come through me." The preacher nodded. "Then we leave at dawn." Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, Crow's campfires glowed low. The next sunrise would decide whether Ridgewater was a town that sold a woman twice, or a town that finally learned what decency was worth. Dawn came pale and cold over Ridgewater, and the wagons rolled out before the sun fully cleared the hills. 2 supply carts first, then a doctor's buggy, then the church wagon, with Margaret wrapped in a plain wool shawl that used to belong to her sister. Sarah had been gone 2 years now, and Margaret was the older one, the one who had always tried to be the steady hand in a family that kept losing its footing. Amos rode alongside the lead cart with his rifle across his saddle. Wade Mercer took the rear with 3 ranch hands who had finally decided that a town was more than a collection of buildings and paychecks. Crow did not believe in losing clean. He believed in timing. He waited until the road narrowed at Willow Cut, where cottonwoods leaned over the trail and the creek ran close enough to drown out a warning shout. His men came in quiet and fast. Not a full charge, just enough to scatter horses and force panic. He wanted Margaret in the confusion. He wanted Amos pulled away from the wagon line. He wanted the story to end before anyone could repeat it in a courthouse. The first shot hit a wagon wheel and splintered wood into the air. The mules lurched. Amos swung his horse hard and shouted for the drivers to keep moving. Mercer's rifle cracked from the rear, and one of Crow's men went down into the brush with a curse. The ranch hands held their line in a way they probably had not known they were capable of until that moment. Crow rode straight for the church wagon. He was close enough for Amos to see the small scar at his jaw and the calm in his eyes. The calm of a man who had done this too many times and expected the world to step aside. "You don't get to bring law into the wilderness," Crow called. Amos answered without raising his voice. "You don't get to pretend you are the law." Margaret did not hide. She stood at the wagon step with a pistol Reverend Cole had pressed into her hand before the wheels turned. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "I am not property." Crow smiled like that was a childish line in a grown man's game. "There's a price on you, ma'am. I'm just collecting what's owed." He reached for the wagon rail, and Amos fired once, not to kill, but to cut the leather strap of Crow's saddlebag. The bag spilled open in the dirt. Papers and ledgers scattered across the road. Names, dates, payments. That ugly little spine of truth that made bounty work look respectable. Margaret stared at the pages like she was seeing the cage she had escaped from laid out in ink. Mercer dismounted, scooped the ledger, and held it up. "That's federal money," he said to Crow. "That's kidnapping, dressed in paperwork." Crow's face changed then, just a flicker, but it was enough. The sound that ended the fight was not another gunshot. It was a bugle. A small patrol from Fort Laramie rounding the bend with dust on their coats and authority in their posture. They had been sent out after Reverend Cole's telegram made it through the line the night before. Crow realized too late that Ridgewater had stopped being a quiet place where a rich man's influence could hide. He tried to turn his horse. Amos was faster. He hooked Crow's reins with a rough rope and pulled him off balance. The patrol took the rest. By late afternoon, the wagons rolled into the fort yard. A marshal with tired eyes read the ledger twice and nodded like a man who had been waiting for a door to finally open. Crow and 2 of his men were locked up before supper. The others vanished into the plains with nothing but empty saddles and the knowledge that the game had changed. That night, Margaret sat on the steps of the small quarters the fort doctor had offered her. The sky was clean. The wind was gentle. Amos stood beside her in a silence that felt earned. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life being a ghost that only shows up when someone is lonely," she said. Amos looked at the lantern light in her eyes. "Then don't be a ghost," he paused. "Be a choice." She exhaled a soft laugh that sounded like relief. "Can I sleep beside you tonight?" It was not a plea now. It was a tender kind of courage. Amos nodded once. "You can. And when morning comes, you can decide again." In the weeks that followed, Margaret stayed near the fort, teaching children to read in the small schoolhouse and writing letters to women whose names she had found in Crow's papers. Amos took contract work for the patrols and returned every few days with dust on his boots and steadiness in his hands. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Just 2 people learning that love after grief was not betrayal. It was survival, turning into life. If this story warmed something in you, subscribe to Tales from the Wild West for another quiet, firelit ride. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from.